Well, good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, by our expert and co-host and minister, Steve Fox. How you doing there, buddy?
The co-host and minister.
And an expert.
You hit that right on the head. The expert, I don't know where you drug that. You pulled that out of the clouds somewhere. Well, an expert is somebody who's at least 20 miles away from home with a briefcase.
Well, you're 20 miles from Cleveland.
I am. And I carry a well, this is kind of like a briefcase.
Yeah.
I would not rather have anybody except you to be the co-host and the expert.
No. Hey, listen. The one truth that you and I have readily admitted, our favorite expression is what?
I don't know. We'd be good at Trivia Pursuit because you just sit there and wait for it to be your turn. And you go,
your answer, yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Let somebody smarter than I am answer the question.
Yeah. So.
Well, I hope that all our families that watch had a great time over the holidays. A lot of people on the rivers, a lot of people on the lakes, a lot of people from our church flying around in boats. I mean, a very good, safe speed.
Reasonably.
Yeah, but trying out their new boats and trying out their new cars, and I hope everybody had a nice weekend, a nice week, and it's stinking hot still. So I hope we don't have to deal with that very much longer. Of course, it is July.
It is July, and we're in those days of the summer. You know, I remember back during the winter when we were just complaining that we wanted it to get warm. Well, guess what?
Where'd that phrase, dog days, isn't that like the last part of summer?
It is. It begins sometime in early August. I forget the clarification of as to what defines dog days, but I just do know that it is in the summer, and it's when I think the sun's at a particular angle.
Maybe it's when all the dogs go under the front porch. They're looking for shade.
Yeah, it's basically one of those times when all of nature is looking for someplace cool to be.
Okay, since both of us are so good at trivia, there's a group from somebody out there in our audience.
Okay, you said since we're us.
Years and years ago, there was a rock band from Australia. In Australia, people that live in poverty in Australia had a habit. If you came to my house and it was really, really cold, I'd give you my dog so you could sleep up next to the dog. So if it was really, really cold, you know what you had? A 3-dog night.
And I actually like that group.
Well, I love them. Yeah. And that's a true story.
And I believe that.
I thought it was a date that I had in high school, but Susie told me it wasn't that. It was something else.
Oh, please straighten up.
Okay.
Turn your Bibles.
You're going to cut out the first 20 minutes of our...
Well, exactly. Thank goodness it's only like three and a half minutes here.
Oh, well.
Go ahead, and if you'd like to, turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 16. Steve's going to read this morning, and we're going to be studying the parable of the shrewd manager.
The two parables that we're going to study today and next week, you might have to read it. If you've never read it before, you might have to read them 4 or 5 times to think about what's Jesus saying, and to continue to ask our question, who am I in this parable? Mm-hmm. Because this one's not black and white like a lot of his parables
were. Okay. This one is confusing.
Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and this steward was reported to him as squandering his possessions. In other words, he was cheating. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. And the steward said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the stewardship away from me? Sounds like Britney Spears does. Mm-hmm. I am not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I'm removed from the stewardship, they will receive me into their homes. And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, And he began saying to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, "Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Now, let me stop here for a minute. We hear about people who do this in our era, in our age, every once in a while.
Yeah.
I owe you $1 million, and so I come in and say, "How about if I give you $500,000? And you say, "Okay." I've even heard of people in this state saying, don't sell certain people to certain things to certain people, because we'll never get our money.
Yeah.
We might get half of it.
Right.
And you just can't walk into a Kroger store and say, "I'd like to have that and that and that," and you get up there and your total's $20, and you say, "I'll
give you 10.
I'll give you 10.
Yeah. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work. And he said, 100 measures of oil, take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. And then he said to another, "How much do you owe?" And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous steward because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when it fails, they may receive you into his eternal dwellings." Now we could spend 3 weeks on verse 9, but we're not going to. "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. If therefore you have not been faithful in the use of righteousness mammon, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you've not been faithful in the use of what is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters." Now, it's getting a little clearer here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
"For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon."
As you stated from the very get-go, this one is a very difficult one to take a humanistic approach to things and apply it to a biblical principle. And that's, I think, is oftentimes where our issue comes, because we can readily relate to the first half of the story. The only difference is today, this manager would have been, when the boss called him in and said, "Hey, you have mismanaged my affairs. All right, you're terminated immediately." Mm-hmm. But in this case, the manager, he stays on till for whatever period of time that it, they'd come to. So in his, I guess, if it was either a day or a couple days, the manager decides, "Okay, hey, I've messed up big time. I'm in a lot of trouble here." I love his expression. He said, "I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg." Yeah, so.
Well, when you initially read this story and you compare it to other things that are in the New Testament, it doesn't make sense.
No.
Because this guy is losing a lot of money. Not only from the guy who is, what's the word, not swindle, squander.
Yeah.
He was squandering his material possessions, but he's going to now suggest something to him that most of us wouldn't. If you owed me $50 and you came and said, "Hey, can I give you 20? I'd probably say no.
No. Well, but
he's saying if you do that, you're intelligent, you're wise.
Well, I think that's where we'll get down to that where he says that in here in a second. But the bottom line is, a manager for the rich man would have been in charge of the accounting and making sure that everything was taken care of like it's supposed to be taken care of in order for the businessman. Evidently, his practices were balanced toward his favor, okay? Mm-hmm. He wasn't looking after the rich man's affairs. He was looking out after his own. And now, that is our first clue as to who are we in this parable. In our relationship with God, whose affairs are we looking after? Are we looking after God's or our own? In this case, the example that Jesus is giving them is he's illustrating them a man whose only intent is to take care of himself. He's not interested in taking care of God. And his conclusion of the matter is, you can't serve God or money. In this case, he was looking after himself. So the manager then decides, okay, I've messed up completely. And it's like he doubles down, He says, what I'm going to have to do is, so he takes advantage of the situation. It's surprising. If he would have said, hey, you give me 100,
baskets of wheat.
Yeah, and you pay him this amount, we'll call it square. Well, he would have gone to jail for that. But what he did was, as a manager, he could do is say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write off some of this. Now, he didn't steal it, but he gained favor with someone who had a relationship with God in the rich man. So he did this twice. So he's hoping, and this is the part where Jesus says the master commended the dishonest manager. I love it. He didn't commend his manager, he commended the one dishonest.
Well, I think inherent in that word, I forgot it again, squandering. You can just see in your own mind, this one guy, every once in a while, he's stealing a little bit from the master.
He's taking a little bit that doesn't belong to him, yes.
So if I just take a little bit, nobody will notice it. But somehow the master found out that that's what was happening.
It's always a funny story in some of the movies where they, drug cartels hire this guy to manage your money. And he said, there was so much money, I never figured they'd miss just a few thousand here and a few thousand there. And I'm thinking of one of the Lethal Weapon movies. Mel Gibson says to him, no, drug cartels know.
They can figure it out.
Yeah, it doesn't take them long. They pretty much know the state of the human condition, that given the opportunity, you're going to take what doesn't belong to you.
There's an old proverb, and I don't remember the origin. I don't know if it's the United States, China, Russia. There's an old proverb about some people that went to a wedding. Everybody went to a wedding, and they were supposed to bring their own wine. And they put all the wine together in a vat. And when they started drinking the wine, they realized that every person that brought wine said, if I just pour some water in here, nobody will notice it. So they all poured their wine in there, and what it was water, because everybody brought a little bit of water, knowing. And that's what this guy does. I can take a little bit here and a little bit there, and nobody will notice it, especially my master. But somehow he figures it out, and he knows exactly what's going on.
And in Jesus' time, no different than the time that we live in today, human nature being what it is, and our desire to have things more, and to be well liked, is such a dangerous trap that it causes us to lose perspective. And
that's why I said you can't serve both things.
That's right. You can't. And then, of course, the master commends the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. I mean, he knows what he is, but he did commend him for, hey, okay, the only card you had the only thing you had as a way to maybe alleviate the fall you're about to take, you acted shrewdly, and not necessarily acted wisely or in the best interest of everyone involved.
You wouldn't want to do this 100% of the time.
No, but at the same time, he acted shrewdly in his own favor. Okay, He didn't steal anything, but as a manager, he was allowed to cut bills in half, and he did. And he commends him because he reminds him, for the people of which world? This world. Are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than they are the people of the light. That to me is the key verse in this entire parable. Because
well, look at 14. It says the Pharisees were making fun of him. They were scoffing. Jesus' answer. They were saying, that's not very smart. That's not the way you should do it. And I hope when Susie sees this, when it comes to my weekly allowance, that when she says, here's your $25, I'm going to say, can I have 50? She'll say, well, what'd you do with the 20 I gave you last week? So maybe we'll learn something from this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she can't love me and money at the same time.
Well, good luck with that. But,
yeah. And if it works, I'm going to write a book so every husband in the United States can.
Yes. Well, the point is this. The stark contrast that Jesus is making is what is acceptable and looked upon favorably in the world won't necessarily be looked upon favorably in the light, in the world of light that Jesus is trying to bring into this thing. I mean, there is nothing wrong with knocking something off on somebody's bill if there are circumstances involved. But you would definitely seek the owner's approval before you did such a thing. But because he had those powers, he acted shrewdly toward his, as Jesus put it, his own kind.
And if there are people who believe in grace, they would be willing to do that.
Absolutely. Imagine this, and you also got to look at it like this too. The people that the manager went to, knowing something's probably up, went along. So in our world today, you can be just as culpable and get in trouble as the manager in this instance of a story. The both businessmen or debtors owed a debt. They knew what they were supposed to pay, but yet they were willing to go along.
It didn't come out even exactly 100%, but it seems though most of the people are satisfied with what they got.
It would look on the surface, hearing Jesus tell the story, that this was all okay, but it wasn't okay.
Okay, here's the target. Who are you in this parable?
Who are you in this parable?
I'll ask you first.
Oh. In all honesty, I hope I'm none of these people in this story.
Well, you don't want to be the guy cheating.
No.
And you don't have to be the one who's in charge who comes up with the idea.
Well, I think the question is that this one to me is a little bit different in who are you in this story, because we have several people involved. We know we're not the rich man. That's God.
Yeah.
So
I've never had to make those choices, and you haven't either.
Well, in a period of my life, I would have been probably the manager. I did do things that were in my favor, that maybe weren't in someone else's favor. Mm-hmm. One of the hardest things for me, I used to sell products and services. And at times, I found myself selling products and services that benefited me in commissions, bet more than maybe exactly what those people needed. It's sort of like going to visit a car lot, and not all sale commissions on cars are the same. There are some cars they get bigger commissions on.
Sure.
And it would be like the salesman steering you toward those cars where he makes a bigger commission on it than the car that serves your needs the best. That's serving yourself over serving God.
And that's why we have those commercials on TV where they promise you'll never have to go to a car lot again. You
Yeah.
can just do it over the phone.
Do it over the phone, the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, and they are booming. In fact, there's several companies out now that they want to take the salesman out of the way.
I still haven't seen the one where you put your money in and the car drops down like a candy bar.
They send you that coin and you go to it.
You seen that advertisement?
Yes, it's one of the Carvana.
Well, what if you hit the wrong button and you...
No, it's tagged up.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
anyway, so now we've got verse 9. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcome into eternal dwellings.
Good luck on that.
Well, I don't know. You could say eternal dwellings is two different possible places.
Yeah.
You know,
But he's commended him for the way he does it.
well, when he dealt with his own kind, he did the only thing he could to deal with his own kind. But then verse 10 kind of clarifies what has just transpired. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? The bottom line is, when it comes right down to it, Jesus says the world has a set of standards that is perfectly acceptable inside that realm of standards that the world has. But with God, it's an entirely different economy. It doesn't work the way the world does. And ultimately, it's God's riches, no matter how you figure who has ownership of it.
And Luke makes that clear because in verse 13 he says you can't serve two masters. And in 12 he had already said, if you're faithful in what you do down here on the earth, God will allow you to be faithful to the things you have. I don't know what we're going to have in heaven. I don't know if we're going to have TV.
Well, I don't even know if it's as much as completely fully in heaven. I honestly believe that, as Jesus pointed out several times, eternal life begins here.
Yeah.
Now, there must be some responsibilities to have once we're finished on this side of death, but for the practical standpoint of Jesus' parable here, it's dealing with, are you going to live by the world's guidelines, or are you going to live by God's?
Mm-hmm.
And if you live by the world's and you're dishonest with a little, who's going to give you God's not going to give you anything.
Yeah.
But if you're honest with a very little, guess what God will do with it? He will increase it.
Multiply it.
He'll give you much. It is a what is that line? It's a scary thing to be in the hands of God. You know, what's that line?
Oh, sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Yes. It's a dreadful thing.
Who wrote that? It was an entire sermon, but the title was "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," and the preacher who preached its name was, I'll tell you next week.
Okay, but you know the circumstance.
Jonathan Edwards.
Okay, Jonathan Edwards. It is and the bottom line question, as you keep pointing out, verse 13 is, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Or in this more honest, not necessarily honest, but more accurate to me sometimes, our understanding is you're either going to do it God's way or the world's way. One of the two. And you're going to come down to it. That's it. Because if money is that so important to you, you will never love God the way you should.
And in verse 14, we're told again by Luke, he does this a lot. And Matthew does it too, where you get to the end of a parable.
Gives you a little conclusion of the story.
Yeah, he's talking about me.
Yeah, read that 14.
Sounds like he's talking about me.
To me, this is the key verse.
Now the Pharisees, and then Luke says, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things, and they were scoffing at him.
Yeah.
They were scoffing at the Master, who is God. He said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. And there's another principle that makes the whole thing fit together. But God knows your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God.
It would sort of be like, remember when Jesus comes into the temple courts? Mm-hmm. And he turns over their scales, he turns over their cheating tables, where they were just doing everything they could to make what? More money.
And they had turned a temple into a Walmart.
Yeah.
You could buy anything you want to.
I mean, it was the one moment that we have in Jesus' entire ministry where we're like, we know which guy we're not in this. We don't want to be in this story.
And he didn't ask for any help. He took
care of it. He took care of business himself.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the one thing that the Pharisees, that Jesus is, he's not just in a roundabout way telling them. He's telling them their story. This is what you do. You take what God's given you and you mismanage it. And you mismanage it in such a way that the only person you care about in your transactions of life is yourself. You want more money. You don't want anything that God wants. You're not interested in it.
When you look at 13, the very, very obvious comparison is God and money.
Yeah.
And we live in an age where that concept surrounds us. The more money I have, the better I look, and it makes you look a little bit worse.
That's right.
So I got to do all this stuff to make more money, And if we have to go on strike to make more money, we'll go on strike to make more money. But you can't.
I got to cheat a little bit to make more money?
Sure, yeah. No, nobody's going to say anything about that because a great percentage of the people do it. They want that power that comes from money. They want a celebrity status in their life that most of the time comes from money. And so when he says this to the Pharisees, he says, this is what you guys do. And they were all listening to these things, and they were scoffing at him. Jesus was a man, and I'm not saying Jesus never asked us to do this. Jesus was a man who owned nothing.
I know.
You didn't have him having the problem of, do I follow God or do I follow money?
Well, the only thing that he owned was what he wore.
Yeah.
That was it.
And they put him in a borrowed tomb. He didn't even have his own grave. I mean, here was a guy who gave stuff away every day to people who needed it. And these Pharisees were like people in our age who just, if you open up the closet, and you got 50 pairs of pants and 50 shirts and 50 pairs of shoes, and you won't help anybody else with that, you're loving money instead of loving what God has asked us to do.
It is a...
I don't love money, by the way. I'm exactly the opposite. I'm the other way around. Susie says I'm cheap. I'm frugal. There's a difference between being cheap and frugal. But I would be, one of the things in this world that would never, ever make me happy is a bunch of money. Because God has put in my heart to whatever extra stuff I got, it's not mine. Well, everything that I have belongs to God.
That's right.
But to just try to live your life where you, well, the word is miser. If I want to become a miser, just hold everything to my own chest instead of giving it to anybody else. And that's what some of these people were. That's what some of the Pharisees were, because Jesus is saying, you're going to have to make up your mind.
Yeah.
Do you love money enough? And just let me say one more thing about occupation. Read the newspaper tonight or tomorrow night or next night and look and see how many people are living because they love money. A mafia hitman. Why does a mafia hitman go out and kill somebody? Because of the money.
Because of the money.
Why do men and women get little children involved in pornography? One reason. For the money. They know they can make a lot of money doing that.
Yeah.
And people cheat all the time at their jobs, at their office, because they think a little bit more money is going to help them out. It's I think our society's biggest problem.
I know for me that it was a absolute struggle. It was probably the biggest hindrance in my coming back to Christ,
Mm-hmm.
was because my love for money. I mean,
Now, I'm not saying it doesn't feel good. You walk around with a little bit of money in your wallet, it feels pretty good.
well, you know, the thing is this, that when you decide that, as Jesus put it several times, when you're looking for, and you said it too, the approval of others, when you're looking at the status that money presents to you, it is an addiction that our society is eat up with right now. And I understand, I can relate to it, because I've been there, and it for me is still yet at times a struggle, because it is so easy to think, oh man, if I just had that. Well, you know.
And that's who I think we are in the parable.
Yep.
The one who says, how am I going to live my life? Am I like the Pharisees were? The Pharisees had to decide that day after they heard the teaching of Jesus, is my life okay? And that's where you and I are in the parable. We're having to try and decide, do I live my life the way I want to live it and climb the social ladder and step on everybody I want to step on the way up? Or do I live my life according to the regiments and rules of Christ?
Yeah. At what point do you become the dishonest manager?
Yes.
At what point?
And have to move the numbers around in the books to make it come out.
To make it work for yourself. Yeah. Where are you? And Jesus, without a doubt, you got to decide. It's either God or money.
Can't love both of them.
You can't love them both. It's impossible, because all you're going to, whatever money you have, you're never going to be happy with, because you're going to be constantly reminded of what you had to do to get it.
And especially when you have extra money, it's such a great feeling of freedom that you can help other people, that you can give them something that they really need. And that goes back to being frugal or being cheap. One of my really close friends was an elder at a church in Nashville, Tennessee. And years ago, when I was on a mission trip with him and his wife, Susie was talking about me being cheap. And she said, well, he's not as cheap as my husband. And she said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, can you beat this? She said, about a week ago, we were in Goodwill. And Robert saw this jacket, beautiful jacket, looked like it was brand new. He goes in, puts it on, takes his other coat off, puts it on, fits perfectly. Just fits like Cinderella slippers. And so he takes the coat up, lays it on the counter, and a girl comes over and starts to figure out the price, and she says, oh, and there was a $5 sticker on it. And she said, oh, you're very, very fortunate, because today everything with those purple stickers, it's half price. He said, that's $2.50? Yes, that's $2.50. And he said, oh, that's amazing. And she started to ring it up again. He said, did you get my senior citizen discount? Now that's cheap. I don't care who you are. That's cheap. Going to get a coat for $2.50 and wants another quarter off of.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that's cheap.
I'm not saying he lives like that all the time, but that sure was funny because his wife watched for cases like that, and my wife probably does the same thing too.
Well, it was funny last night. Kelly and I were watching some YouTube videos, and I'll make this quick because I know we're running out of time. It was done by a car company, and he was doing statistics on who buys these cars, and they come to find out, do you know who buys the very expensive cars? It's not the rich people. The high dollar cars, the Jaguars, the
BMW.
Yeah, all these really, really $80,000, $100,000 cars.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not rich people. They buy the more conservative car. It's generally people who really can't afford that car who buy that vehicle.
They're going to lose it.
Well,
because they can't make payments.
Well, no, it wasn't that. It was just the fact that
a lot of people bought houses years ago. Same.
Yeah, we buy more than we can afford in order that we make ourselves look better. Mm-hmm. And in truth, that is probably a key question to ask yourself. Do you ever purchase something just so that someone else will look to you and say, oh, look at what they got?
Do you ever put certain clothes on to say, oh, I hope people look? Obviously, you and I don't live that way, but
obviously,
you put certain clothes on because you want people to notice you. And
yeah. Yeah.
The key, as you said a minute ago, is in verse 15. And he said to them, the Pharisees, who are lovers of money, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men. I want man to look at me and say, he's got a nice car, he's got nice clothes. Yeah, he's a success. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men. But here's the key. But God knows your hearts.
God knows your heart.
Nothing wrong with buying an expensive automobile, but God knows why you bought it and what you're going to do with it. So he says, God knows your hearts. Everything that's in this parable, God could read your hearts and tell exactly what they were doing.
And why they were doing it.
And if you're living your life so you can make more money and look better to society, it's like the castles that Jesus talked about, building a house on sand and building a house on a rock. One of these days it's going to crash.
Well, it brings in the context of why you can't serve God or money, because no matter, at some point in time, you're going to have to decide if that object is more important to you than your relationship with God, because you may have to let go of it.
Yep.
I mean, even when it comes to people's tithing or giving to God, I mean, I know we have a principle in the Bible, but it's sort of like, and I'm not trying to meddle, okay? And don't.
I'll do that later.
Okay. Do you give God what's left, or do you purpose?
Exactly.
That's where this one really comes down to. And
you want people in your church to get upset with you.
Yeah, talk about money.
Talk about money and talk about giving, but every once in a while we need to think very seriously about that.
Yes, and it's not me telling you this. This is God's word, and this is Jesus Himself saying to you, "Where's your heart? Where's your heart?"
Now, if I'm asking for money so I can become more well-known and I can have a bigger TV program than you got, or, these people that, we're meddling now, but these people that you watch them on TV and they spend 5 minutes talking about the Bible and 25 minutes telling you what the addresses are where you can send your money. And I love watching the religious programs on TV where the speaker will say, we don't want your money.
I love it.
Do not send us any money. And those are rare, by the way.
They are.
But
don't send us any money. We don't want any.
The address is, have you ever noticed when they give their spiel at the end of the talks, And they had gone through becoming a preacher like this, and then going so fast you can't hardly understand. But when they come down to the address where you send the money, that's post office box. That's BOX. And people, I'm not judging them. God's going to judge them. But people stay on TV so they can get in a cycle where the more they're on TV, the more money we want you.
Yeah.
We got to have $1 million by next week, or we're going to be off the air. Well, go ask the people that sponsor the program if they want to give. Oh, I'm way off track. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, that's going to conclude our show this week. Next week we will continue shortly just below where we ended, and I'm closed up my Bible with.
It's Luke 16:16, and then the parable starts in verse 19, and it's a very interesting parable. If it is a parable, it's the only time Jesus ever told a parable when he used somebody's name.
Yes.
Yeah. But if it's a parable or if it's not a parable, it doesn't make any difference.
The rich man and Lazarus.
The rich man and Lazarus. And I already know who I am, but we'll find out next week.
Okay. Well, on behalf of Steve and I, we are so glad that you joined this week, and we look forward to being with you again next week. If there's anything that we can do, any questions you may have, don't know necessarily if we'll have the answers, but we will sure make an attempt at it.
He's better at saying I don't know, so direct the questions to him.
And on behalf of Steve and I, we'll see you next week. God bless.